in from the courts through judicial reviews, the coronial system and other challenges, and every single one of those is a compelling case and it's got legal weight behind it and judicial authority for us to do this. And actually the whole organisation is going to grind to a halt, and that is the mess that we are in around this.
So there you hear it. Policing is in a mess, according to our Chief Constable. The PSNI simply do not have the resources to police the past and the present. And so we're here again, aren't we? The debate that has dogged our steps as a society since the Good Friday Agreement. The issue essentially dodged yet again in the Fresh Start Agreement because our politicians cannot agree on what to do about it. Dealing with the past is necessary for us to deal with the future. But how should we do it? Mark Thompson from Relatives for Justice is with us, along with Norman Hamill, a former RUC officer, and the Ulster Unionist Belfast City Councillor, Jeffrey Dudgeon. Welcome to all of you. Jeff Dudgeon, first of all, we've had the Attorney General in the past saying, well, look, this is going nowhere as a strategy. We need to end prosecutions. We need to end inquests. We need to end inquiries, and draw a line on it under it in that legal sense. Not too many people were stepping forward to agree with that analysis. What do you think?
Well, it's the elephant in the room. Amnesty or drawing a line or staying prosecutions. A large number of people support or have sympathy for most of those ideas. It's not much. Very few people speak about it, or are willing to speak about it, or are too nervous to speak about it. But I've long felt that the Good Friday Agreement in '98 was a form of amnesty. Prisoners were released. The RUC and special branch were disbanded. The final part of that process, to avoid us concentrating only on the past and to enable us to get on with our future, is to have some review of this whole aspect of the past, because as the Chief Constable says, it's going to take over every resource that we have, and it's not going to produce any results that are particularly satisfying. There are many ways we can approach and deal with the past, and many other countries have, but it's drawing a line is the ultimate requirement.
In that legal sense, no more prosecutions?
It would have to be, John Larkin, the attorney, said a stay on prosecutions, which is a sort of legal form of not bringing about prosecutions. And they are so few, and one a year at most, but pre-98.
An end to inquiries?
An end to inquiries. Well, that's what the whole legacy operation that came out of Haas. I was part of the Haas talks. We tried to push the whole matter toward historical review and understanding. That's the big issue, to find out what people did, why they did it, and what they did wrong. Where organisations particularly are concerned, they set out to unite Ireland or to stay in the UK. So why did they go about killing hundreds of people, which was contrary to the aims and needs of the people? It's that sort of thing that needs to be investigated historically, and historians are the best people to do it.
So in saying today, essentially, you agree with John Larkin on this, drawing a line is what we should be doing at this point. You also said in making that point, Jeff, that you know that there are a lot of politicians who privately take that view, but they simply won't say that in public.
Well, there's various reasons. They are nervous of response from the victims and the victims' relatives and so on. And understandably, they have both concerns and grievances that they want rectified. I don't think, by and large, they're going to ever get rectified. There's a whole sub-issue about the files, the security files and all the rest of it. We can maybe deal with that later. But and the European Court of Human Rights, Article 2, the right to life, that has been sort of dogmatised to a point now where it's become a religion that everything has to go through Strasbourg, or has to be seen in the light of the Strasbourg judgments, and those Strasbourg judgments are not set in stone. The London government, if it had the wit and energy, could go about reviewing all that as it did when it set up HET.
Mark Thompson, let's try and lay this out, and tell me if you think this is a naive and unnuanced description of where we are with this. But the police are saying we couldn't even try with the resources that we have to fully police the past. We could put all of our energies into that and we still wouldn't be able to do it. And that's ignoring all of contemporary crime that we need to be working on as well. So that's we can't do it in terms of policing the past. We've tried to get an agreement on truth and justice, But the British government don't think Sinn Féin's going to open any of its information, or the IRA is going to open any of its information. The IRA don't think the British government can be trusted to open any of theirs, and so that's stalled. That's not going to go anywhere, right? So there are two possible alternatives. What Jeff Dudgeon has just described in terms of essentially an amnesty. Or third, and this seems to be what we're doing at the minute, we continue to allow people to die. Victims die. Their families never get the justice, they never get the truth, and eventually in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, some semblance of the truth might come out. But that seems to be where we are. Those are the options. Does that seem fair?
Well, I suppose in the broad sense it gives paints a broader canvas. I think when you distill down into it, you get finer detail. I think the first thing to say is the past is ever present. It permeates every aspect of civil, political life here. It infects everything. And not resolving it, I think, was clearly recognised when the two largest parties to the executive, the DUP and Sinn Féin, asked for the assistance of Haas and O'Sullivan did come up with recommendations. We had Eames Bradley before that. So we've had a template. The problem is in and around that not everyone was in the room. And this latest agreement, the Stormont House Agreement of December 2014, both governments and all the political parties to the executive were in the room and signed up to the process. And the process was in essence built upon Eames Bradley and Haas O'Sullivan in a formula and a mechanism that can take us forward. I'm an optimist. We're tentatively close to getting over the line. And yes, there's a bit of a
close to getting over the line.
I think so. This comes down to one issue that could be resolved in a matter of days, in my view.
What's that?
The issue of national security. In terms,
and you think that could be resolved in a day?
You see, it's the issue of.
We're only finding out now about the British forces in Kenya during the Mau Mau period.
You see, there's been intensive negotiations, and they've went on through the party leaders group since December last year up until November. And unfortunately, they didn't get agreement over the line in terms of the legacy elements, and the Stormont House Agreement had went forward. In my view, this comes down to the one issue being crystallised around the onward disclosure issue around national security. Sinn Féin made a proposal, and the proposal was that they bridge that gap, that there'd be 3 judges, an international judge appointed by both the governments in the jurisdiction, and one from each side of the jurisdiction, if you will. And that was a way forward. The Secretary of State had rejected that, but the Secretary of State has said publicly that they've stretched themselves and they're open to the consideration of alternatives. Now, at the same time in the week that happened, we had a United Nations Special Rapporteur on the promotion of truth, justice and reparations and non-recurrence, Mr. Pablo de Griff. And he had a country visit to the jurisdiction in which he said these issues are not insurmountable and there are ways and assistance and mechanisms to get over that. I believe he's right. And I believe that Sinn Féin, the other parties to the executive and the British government, but principally the two, it's come down to...
You really are an optimist,
well, I am, and I think...
Because we've been going in circles on this since 1998.
And I think we're the closest we've ever been because everybody's signed up and everybody's been in the room. And the previous occasions we knew what the issue was. But I want to talk briefly about the issue of policing. You see, and I agree, there's been 3 chief constables that have said they can't deal with the past. Hugh Ord, Matt Baggett and now George Hamilton. And I think it's right. The PSNI shouldn't be left with the legacy of dealing with the past. And we have a template. The focus should be on the Secretary of State. They actually say then, what is she going to put in place to get this over the line in terms of onward disclosure to satisfy all the issues? And I think that's where our energies should be focused. But what's going on in the High Court as we sit here over the past 2 weeks is a contradiction of what the Chief Constable says because they are sitting in possession of many, many documents they're not handing over. So what he says publicly about resources masks an excuse, or is an excuse masking the ability to actually pass them over. And Justice Weir's been critical for 2 weeks. It's been the recurring theme.
Let me give the number, 03030 80 55 55. I know some people are trying to get on air. I'll come to you in a second. I want to give Norman Hamill his turn on this. Just give us your response to what you've just been hearing about the police and also how we might move forward here in terms of truth and justice issues.
Okay, well clearly Mark Thompson is very optimistic and I'm afraid I'm less so. But I would like him to be right and me to be wrong. But I think there is a bit of a cynical game going on here between the politicians and the British government. You know, it's such an enormously difficult issue to resolve, and Mark Thompson's really oversimplifying it when he says it comes down to the issue of the British government hiding behind the claim about national security, because I think there's a wider problem in that. I think we're unrealistic and naive if we think that either the British government and all their various actors in the intelligence world are going to suddenly tell all the truth. And there's another problem in that the paramilitaries, we saw it in the Smithick inquiry and so on, there's a line which they won't cross. And so I think we're basically not going to be able to solve this. And so
Norman, could you summarise it like this? There are a lot of powerful people who will never allow the full truth to be told.
I think that's right. And therefore, no matter how unsatisfactory it is, the Attorney General's idea of drawing a line under the past becomes the least worst option, because there's no satisfactory answer to this. We endured a long and dirty war, and we can't afford to go on endlessly refighting it. And I know it's very clear the Chief Constable has an immediate problem of resources in answering what he calls a tsunami of requests for information. And when he speaks of the organisation grinding to a halt, that's very, very stern warning, a very extreme situation. I think he's got to be listened to.
Mark Thompson is shaking his head to that. You think, obviously, that's not the case at all.
I think the Chief Constable's overplaying this. There's plenty of resources when it comes to injury on duty or pensions or other issues. This is a small issue in terms of the information they retain, passing it on. And what the PSNI have engaged in is a convoluted and contrived process whereby even the Belfast Telegraph headlines, BBC News reports, are classified as top secret. So what we're doing is we're weeding through all this contrived process which is a process of stalling and delaying.
And you're an optimist about all
and
that.
the will, if there's the will to present the information, that's the issue, the will to do it.
Okay, 20 seconds, and then we're coming back to this after the news, incidentally, but just a brief response.
Okay, well, it's a question of the files. The Sinn Féin actually vetoed the whole legacy operation a month back there. National security is a huge issue, and it is a very real issue, and it's not just about Belfast Telegraph headlines. No nation state can release the files that would endanger its existence.
All right, well, we'll return to this after the news, and we're taking you 5:55. You've been listening to Jeff Dudgeon, the councillor from the Ulster Unionist Party, making the argument. He now agrees with the Attorney General, John Larkin, that it is time to draw a line under the past in the sense of an end to a stay on prosecutions, inquiries, inquests. Essentially, he says that is living out the implications of what was in the Good Friday Agreement. In practical terms, there was an amnesty there, whether we called it that or not. We're also joined by Mark Thompson from Relatives for Justice. He says we're actually close to getting across the line in terms of a deal that would secure truth and justice for many people. And Norman Hamill, former RUC inspector, says he agrees entirely with George Hamilton, who has prompted this conversation, the Chief Constable, who says we simply can't go on like this, trying to police the past and police the present at the same time. What do you think? We'll go to Mairead first. Hello, Mairead.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Mairead.
I had actually just spent a couple of minutes there reading through the Chief Constable's speech on the Human Rights Bill, and I actually was very disappointed in the fact that, the councillor there on the programme with you is talking in the same lines as John Larkin about drawing a line under the past, and I find that very insulting for relatives like myself who have lost somebody and they're in controversial circumstances that they've been killed, and there are a multitude of questions that have been left unanswered, and it's very, very difficult to move on from something like that until you do get the answers. And I do believe that we are very close to getting all these cases resolved. And I was up there yesterday at my brother was one of the men killed at Loughgall, and I was up there yesterday at the preliminary hearing, and I was listening to that, and the council on behalf of the PSNI and the MOD use the issue of lack of resources. It just seems to be that they're throwing this up at every case, but I believe that if the will is there, there's a way to do this, and in the Loughgall case, we are probably at an advantage on a lot of cases that the paperwork in our case has already been discovered. It's been sitting with the Secretary of State, the NIO, Jeremy Wright, the Advocate General, less than a year ago, and we could actually move and close the Loughgall case as soon as the will on the other side is there.
And that's the issue, whether the will be there for you, Mairead. Let's get your response from Jeffrey Dudgeon.
Well, I think on inquest, the fact of the matter is that every single Troubles death will eventually result in a reopened inquest, because very few of them were very thorough in their day. The files were never seen, or the paperwork was never seen. So this whole process will go on forever otherwise, and therefore common sense has to be applied.
And armed groups tended not to keep notes.
Well, that's my other point, that it's entirely the state's records that are going to be revealed or are being sought. The paramilitary groups didn't keep records, as one paramilitary said to me, and he kept it. He used a gesture. He kept it in his head, his records. So there's never, it's entirely going to be one-sided, and it is the state's responsibility to reveal as much as it can, and it can do more. But the national security issue, the files issue, it's the files. That's the essence of it, because that will eventually show the dirty war aspect, or the grubby aspect, or the agents and informers. And there were so many of those, and that ultimately eroded the paramilitaries to the point where they sued for peace. But those agents are at risk, for starters. No society, no police can operate without informers and agents. And if you close down that option by releasing their names and all the files, that way is disaster.
And those considerations are wrapped into the national security rubric, are they?
Well, that's very much the case. In the Haas talks, I do remember Haas saying that the one thing London said, you can have anything, but you can't have the files. And that's the purpose of the state. Is
Deal breaker. Yeah. And they don't. Is it also the case that, Jeff, do you agree that within this category of national security there could be a concern about national embarrassment?
Well, I think probably not as much as individual embarrassment, but if you think of even the Stasi in East Germany and the files, they've had a huge discussion over releasing those files, because the Stasi didn't just keep files about who their agents were, they kept files on everyone's personal life, their affairs, and they kept deceitful files as well that said that so-and-so was an agent when they weren't, and so the files don't bring about the truth necessarily. Historians are getting closer, we'll get closer to the truth.
Mairead, thank you very much. A question from Alex for Mark Thompson, I think. Alex, go ahead.
Mark, it was a question for Mark as well, but I don't see as a taxpayer why we should spend millions of pounds investing in things when invariably, when I can see the families don't accept the outcome, they simply refuse to believe it. The point about Loughgall, what are we going to discover at Loughgall? An innocent man was shot by the SAS, we know that. We know that I think it was 8 or 9 IRA men were shot. They are heavily armed. They're on their way to kill. They're on the way to destroy. They were met by the SAS. They were met by a greater force, and they were defeated. What are they going to discover? I mean, I can remember, Loughgall brings back memories for me. I was on your show one time before. I was a prison officer at the time in the maze between 2 Provo wings. And whenever the news came on the radio that 8 civilians, I think it was, had been killed at Loughgall, they cheered. The cheer went up. So, I mean, this business of, that is the reality. They simply got what they were going to deliver to somebody else. I can't see how an inquiry is going to tell us anything we don't already know.
What would you do, Alex? Would you draw a line under all of that?
I think draw a line. What are we going to discover about Loughgall? What are we going to discover?
Okay. Mark.
Loughgall? And I also say this, I also went on to join the police. 370 of my colleagues were murdered. Hundreds of them. We don't know who killed them, and there's no inquiries, there's no money been spent to find out who actually killed them, let alone the exact circumstances of it.
Okay, Alex.
So you have to have some sort of fairness.
Let's go to Mark Thompson.
Well, a few facts. I think firstly and foremost, millions of pounds are being spent not to deliver the information. It costs more. It costs nothing to deliver the documents and the truth. I think that's the fundamental point. Yes, any inquiry around everything should be inclusive, and it should include police officers. In fact, in those courts, there's inquests into the killings of police officers. There's inquests into Kingsmill. There's inquests into Protestant people being killed by loyalist paramilitaries too. So it is an inclusive process. Everybody's in that frame, if you will, and they can't get the information. So, what I'd like to say about Loughgall and what needs to be known, if a sovereign government that has a sworn duty to uphold the rule of law and apply the rule of law derogates from that and engages in a policy and a practice whereby they could have made safe and effective arrests within the rule of law, decide to ambush and kill men and fire several hundred bullets at them without any warning whatsoever, well then who are the terrorists, and what should should be done and who's culpable. And so all of those questions about our conflict and who was right and who was wrong, when we examine this, we see it's much more grayer than it was black and white and being presented by the previous caller.
It was a dirty war,
well,
wasn't it?
Of course it was. But the point is, William, we are living with the consequence of what happened, and families are living in their homes, and they have a right to know. This isn't predicated on the goodwill of someone or some department. This is predicated on international fundamental principles in law.
And some people might get truth and justice. They're not all going to get it.
And people, this notion that families want a pound of flesh and families want names. Families want to know what happened. They want the basic right to know the circumstances. And take this week the revelations in the Irish News concerning the Shankill bomb. I've spoke to some of those people and people, that are supporting them also. Those families are left all these years later in a shockwave of this revelation, and they want to know. So this goes on and on and on.
I'll come back to you in a second, Jeff. Linda. Hi, Linda.
Yes, how you doing?
Go ahead. What do you think we should be doing, Linda?
Well, I don't think we should be having an inquest into the Loughgall shootings for a start. Like, them IRA men, I think, weren't going to take our police prisoners. They were going to shoot them. Hello?
Yeah, we're listening. Go ahead.
What about the Warren Point boys and all the police and soldiers? They didn't get no warnings. And these families are looking justice. They're looking to spend the government's money.
Okay, Linda, thank you very much.
Well, I used the term dirty war, and I probably shouldn't actually, because it's not very descriptive. It was, to my mind, a war. Now, the IRA thought it was a war, and they acted as if it was a war. The British government tried to regard it as an internal security issue, but that was irrelevant, really, to the reality. Just as 1916 was effectively a war,
whatever it was a mess.
Followed by a guerrilla campaign for 4 or 5 years, which eventually created the Irish Free State, and the same terrorists became governors there. In a sense. So this does happen. But the notion that the files tell you the truth is just nonsense. The files are what somebody wrote down at the moment, at the time. They were probably protecting their, to some extent.
But they tell you something.
They do tell you something, but
maybe not the whole truth, but they tell you a part of it.
All that they will be used to say is that the state was improper in its activities, that such and such shouldn't have happened, should have happened, omissions were made and all the rest of it. And you can go on forever, because it will never be satisfying to those who want to want to rewrite history, William. That is ultimately the purpose, to create equivalence between the IRA and the security force.
It's about getting as close to the accurate narrative of what happened. I'll give you 2 examples this week, which were cited in the High Court by Justice Weir. Our organisation went to Kew Gardens and uncovered documents that led to the opening of an inquest into the killing of a man in West Belfast. Now, we could go and get those documents and do that, and it will change the official narrative of what happened, and that inquest when it begins. Secondary is that we had a community inquiry into the killing of a young lad in North Belfast, Stuart Lawler, along with a law firm and other NGOs. And we were able to uncover witnesses and many of the facts that still haven't been provided in that court by that family set last week. So, this is about the will, but it's also crucially about the information out there that changes the narrative. And I want to leave people with this thought, because this is quite important. The narrative for Bloody Sunday under Widgery would have remained a historical footnote had we not have had the inquiry. That's why it's important too.
Got time for one more call on this. It's Willie Frazer who's called the programme today. Hi, Willie.
How you doing, William? First off, there is that issue about Loughgall, because it's come up a few times there. And I mean this sincerely. Has anybody ever tried to arrest an armed individual? It's not just a simple case of standing out and saying, please stop and hand over your weapons. These individuals were arrested a number of times out over the years leading up to this and walked freely out of the police station. The only way that these men were ever going to be stopped was if they were caught in the act. And they were caught in the act. Once you lift a weapon to go out and murder people, you give up your legitimate right to any rights that you think you have as an ordinary citizen. Them men were out. The weapons they were carrying related to 70-something murders. But I know that's on the Loughgall issue. On the issue of where we're going from here, this is all about rewriting our history. This is not about finding out right or wrong. This is about a Republican sector rewriting the history whereby they can justify a dirty, stinking campaign that they run out over 40-odd years. Because if they don't justify that, they cannot write the history. And that's what this is all about. These inquiries and stuff that's going on is all one-sided. Yes, we've got an inquiry into King's Mills. It took us 15 years with no resources. We have had to do that out of our off our own backs with the people within the community supporting it. There were no resources given to us to do that. Where it seems to be on one side of the house, resources is threw at it willy-nilly, and hundreds of thousands are given here. We know there was 200 million spent on Bloody Sunday.
Willie, I'm sorry to really interrupt, but we're nearly out of time. But do you think, and I've heard others suggest this before, I think you might have suggested it before, is this your view still, that one way to deal with this question, since our politicians are not going to agree on this, is to put it to the people, just as we put the Good Friday Agreement to the people in a referendum? Should we ask the people of Northern Ireland? I'm not sure whether it would be all of Ireland as it was with the Good Friday Agreement. Should we ask the people, Willie, about drawing a line under this and ending all of this?
Yeah, I think we should ask the people in the areas that were affected.
But you can't have regional kind of referendums on this. You either have one or you don't, Willie.
Well, 60% of Northern Ireland was never affected by the conflict.
Well, that's not
we're affected by the consequences of it.
That's not strictly true, because the whole of Northern Ireland, everyone here and beyond,
everybody's been affected,
was affected. People were psychologically affected for their 30, 40 years of their lives was spent being careful, worrying, fretting, particularly if you just think of all the retired police officers whose day and daily they had to wonder whether would they come home alive. So that there was, the total society was imbued with the problem, and it's only by moving along that we can possibly escape it.
Listen, William, we need to find a process that's engaging all of those issues across this community. There's a common theme. Families that Willie supports and engage with, the police family that have been affected, the Republican Loyalist constituency, the broader constituency out there. There are people in their homes and they want answers and they want to know. And they've a right to do that. You can't just take a referendum and say you don't have a right to do that. That's just nonsense in my view. But we have a common purpose of finding a way and a solution. That solution is based in the agreement here that needs brought over the line.
Bigger question for some people,
and it needs
Mark, is what is going to help the society move forward?
But I think
the future is more important to many people than the past.
The past is ever present because we haven't dealt with it. And I think if we find a way of dealing with it, and we're not going to find it, and we can't make the perfect the enemy of the good, but we need to get a process. Because what we've been told in the last couple of decades is this looms over the institutions and every fabric of this society like a ghost. We need to address it, A, because it's the right thing to do, and B, because it will help society.
Only 2 days ago, the government published a treaty with the Dublin government on informational retrieval, and that's a completely hopeless operation because nobody is going to come forward with information. We're spending millions again on that. It's another non-starter.
All right,
we're not spending millions is the point. We are not. That is a myth.
Keep going for another 10 years. I suspect we probably will, Mark, notwithstanding your optimism. We all like optimists, but we'll book you in for 10 years from now. We'll talk about it all again, shall we? Mark Thompson from Relatives for Justice. Thanks to Norman Hamill, who joined us earlier, and to Councillor